The stars of our video today are the various O-rings that live inside our underwater camera housings. In this video today, we'll look at how you can and should care for those. Coming up. Welcome to the very first episode of this new format here on my channel. The format is called Back2Basics, and the idea behind it is to create small videos, somewhere between 3 to 5 minutes max, where I share some information, some knowledge about filming underwater cinematography, caring for your underwater cinema gear, all that sort of stuff with you in bite-sized little clips. Now, if this is of interest to you, if you're interested in learning more about filming underwater, or if you want to just polish up that knowledge when it comes to filming under the water surface, make sure to hit that subscribe button and also that little notification bell so you do get notified whenever we publish a new video here. So enough self-promotion for the channel, let's get to the topic, which today is O-rings, the ones that sit inside our underwater camera housings. Now, before we go any further here, please make sure to always follow the recommendations of the manufacturer of the camera housing that you're using when it comes to the care of the O-rings that are supplied and used with the housing. Now, there's different types of O-rings and some of them are quite specialized, so you really need to make sure to follow those instructions that are inside the user manual for your housing. But what I want to give you today is some general tips on how to care for your O-rings. I've got 4 tips for you. Let's get into the first one right away. Even underwater housings for the small, compact point-and-shoot cameras, they can have up to several dozens of O-rings inside of them. And that's just because it's not just a big O-ring that goes around the main opening where you put your camera inside, but for every single button and every dial that is on your camera housing, all these need O-rings as well. So you can tell that there's a lot of O-rings even on the smaller camera housings, but that's not a big deal whatsoever because the O-rings actually don't really need a lot of care. They're very simple to care for. First and foremost, it is very important that you don't use too much of the O-ring grease on the O-rings. Now, there's a misconception out there in the field that some people think that the more O-ring grease you put on your O-ring, the better, and the more tighter, the better the seal is gonna be, and this is completely wrong. The O-ring grease is not there to increase the tightness or the seal of your underwater camera housing. It is actually only there to protect the O-ring a little bit from tear and wear. Now, an O-ring will seal perfectly even without any O-ring grease on it. So you can go without adding O-ring grease to the O-ring for a very, very long time, and it's not going to do anything to whether or not your housing is going to stay waterproof or not. I always recommend using the original O-ring grease that you were supplied by the manufacturer when you bought the housing. They normally come in small tubes like this one here, and that should actually last for a very long time. I do a lot of dives, and this little tube lasts me a year easily, if not more. So keep that in mind when you put O-ring grease on your O-ring the next time. It's actually not the more the better, it's the opposite. So just put a tiny little bit on there and don't worry too much about the O-ring grease. Now, a second misconception that I hear every now and then is people saying that you should actually take the main O-ring out of your camera housing every now and then, and in particular if you're not using your underwater camera housing for a prolonged period of time. Now, this is just not really relevant. Now, the O-ring is designed to work in just that space where it sits inside your underwater camera housing, and there's no real reason to take it out on a regular basis or to even take it out when you store the camera, the underwater housing for the camera, for longer periods of time. I personally don't really take that main O-ring out unless I see that it's really dirty and I have to give it a good clean. In that case, I do take it out. Once you have to do that and you take out your O-rings, please don't use any sharp objects to take the O-rings out. Don't even use your fingernails. You can actually damage your O-ring by using your fingernails or a scissor or a knife or anything like that. Always go with the tools that the manufacturer supplies with the housing. Most of the time they've got a little pick that will help you get that O-ring out of where it sits inside. If you don't have anything like that, you can also use, for example, a guitar pick that works perfectly, is nice and soft and won't damage the O-ring whatsoever. But please don't use any knives, any sharp objects to get your O-rings out of the housing. You're just gonna damage them and then have the potential of flooding your housing on the next dive. Another thing that you should avoid doing is exposing your O-rings to too much sunshine. And this sounds very logical, and I know that a lot of you are gonna say, but I never do this. I never put my O-ring into the sun, but think about all the small O-rings that are inside your housing. Have you ever put your housing into the sun to dry out after a diving vacation, maybe on a liveaboard or even after a single dive? So even that is not the best practice. Keep your underwater camera housing in the shade and leave it to dry out in the shade. Don't put it into direct sunshine. It's not gonna do any good for your O-rings. And last but not least, even though the O-rings, they don't really need a lot of care, after a certain amount of time you should actually have your camera housing inspected by professionals. So you're best off to go to the next camera store, underwater camera store, and have them have a look at your camera. And you should do that probably every 5 to 7 years. Now, this number is an approximate. It obviously depends a lot on how often you dive and how many hours the housing gets in the water. Now, these 5 to 7 hours, they are based on a vacation diver, someone who dives, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks every single year with the camera housing. So for a person that has that much use on their camera housing, I would say you can wait 5 to 7 years in between the service intervals of your housing, and then you should actually give it to a professional to have a proper look and maybe even exchange some of the O-rings. And there you go, some quick and easy tips on how you can care for your O-rings inside your underwater camera housings. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you did enjoy this first episode of the new format, Back to Basics, on my channel. If that was the case, please do hit that like button and also consider subscribing for more content like this in the future. And please also let me know how you liked this first episode, this new format here on the channel, by leaving a comment down in the comment section below. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.